Hey, what's up? It's Kit. Time for another video. Today, very interesting topic. JDM versus US tackle. What's the difference? Which one's better? And why? Okay, the biggest question is the why. If you're new to the channel, this channel talks about the hows and whys of fishing. We cover everything from big game, ultralight, everything in the middle, including fly fishing. And yeah, this topic has been something that's been lingering in my mind for a really long time. And then I thought that, hey, you know what? Let's do this. Especially since this is going to be the very first official video in the new space. And yeah, very interesting. All right, so why JDM? All right, and why USDM? Well, there's a huge connection between these two markets, and having that two Japanese brands are the biggest in the world, and their standards when it comes to fishing rods and reels. And the US is the world's biggest market, and the US is also exporting globally. Japan is kind of a closed market, especially with the JDM products, and it's only in recent years that it's actively being sold elsewhere outside of Japan. Before, when we wanted fishing gear from Japan, we used to order from Japan, and it was very difficult. It was a very difficult process, but now you can kind of buy from resellers around the world. So yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand why there is a JDM, why they're expensive, and why they're different from their US counterparts. So yeah, today we're gonna answer that. Before anything else, let's talk about history, because it's really something that's needed. And I think this is also something that needs to be discussed, because fishing is so ingrained in the Japanese society, and a lot of people don't realize how much of a part of the Japanese culture it is. And we start from there. Okay, in fact, 22,770 years ago, believe it or not, that's pretty much the world's oldest fishing hooks, made from sea snail shells, and they were discovered in a cave in Okinawa. These are the oldest samples in the world. Now imagine, if you have a hook, it means you have a line to go with it. So think about this. 22,770 years ago, they were already using hook and line. And that's something that they've done way ahead of everyone else. Now, obviously, when metallurgy was born, things transitioned from shells into hooks. And another milestone that really kind of pushed fishing and ingrained it in the Japanese society is when the emperor actually prohibited the consumption of anything other than wild boar that you can hunt. And obviously there's fish. There was a list of animals and livestock that you can't consume. And wild boar was pretty much the only terrestrial animal, and fish was up for grabs. So right then and there, boom. You know, pretty much the whole of the country just said, okay, let's go fishing. And from there, you know, they've established, like, take for example, there are records of IU fishing, which is a type of crazy type of fishing that they have in Japan. And they have recorded poles of up to 11 meters in the 1400s, and that's just insane. This is already telling you that fishing was already in their society, and it is well ingrained. There are records of samurai fishing, and it's one of their favorite pastimes. And if you know the samurais, they have the katanas and they have the nigata, the spears. And there was already an industry creating really good swords. If you have craftsmen that are making really good swords, really good armor for that time, really intricate things, you bet that they're also doing, or they have an industry for the poles and the line. This is where tenkara was born, by the way. Tenkara is a form of fly fishing that's still practiced till today. So 11-meter poles made out of bamboo were already well established at that time. So there were craftsmen dedicated in making these things. Okay, so fast forward to the present day. You have a society that has fishing as a leisure sport ingrained in their society. What do you think is going to happen? Like everything else Japanese, they nerd out on everything, okay? They nerd out on everything. So, yeah, when it comes to fishing tackle, they have the most state-of-the-art toys, okay? And in present day, every single market actually looks at Japan for innovation, for techniques. They have literally the best reels, the best rods, the best line, the best hooks, and there are manufacturing companies that make all of these. Okay, so they have the craziest gadgets, the craziest accessories in all price ranges. So they have cheap stuff and they have expensive stuff. And they have fishing for minnows all the way to whales. Okay, so let's literally they eat whales too. So I mean, yeah, okay, different type of fishing, and they're using harpoons. But pretty much, this tells you that this society, when it comes to fishing, they're quite advanced. Okay, now up until at one point, when it comes to like rod and reels, at one point, the innovators were the US, was the US. Okay, the innovators was the US at one point. Companies like Penn in the past have pushed innovation, and you can see that they're the ones that actually were the leaders for reels and rods. But somewhere along the way, it kind of shifted. Now, why? Why? Now, see, the US is the world's biggest market when it comes to fishing. And Japan, okay, we have some statistics here. The golden age of Japanese, let's say, fishing was actually around the 1980s. Specifically, I think it's about 1984. That was when their population was 120 million. And 20% of 120 million went fishing. Imagine that. 20% of 120 million people is 24 million. Imagine that. Of the 120 million, 24 million went fishing. Present day Japan has 124.5 million. And as of 2021, in the last survey, only 5% of that goes fishing. That's kind of sad. So it's kind of dwindling. Okay? But remember that the kids in the 1980s, they're now quite senior. And The teenagers in the 80s are now in their 70s, 60s, and guess what? They're the bosses of these companies. Some of them, all right? Some of them are the bosses of these companies, and they're all nerds for fishing. So, having, the kind of mentality that they had, because it's really ingrained in their culture, they've pushed and pushed and pushed. And learning technology that they saw in the US, things basically kind of improved. Now, Shimano, Daiwa has been in the fishing industry for a really long time. Daiwa was one of the giants in tackle. I remember this because when I was a kid, at one point it was all Daiwa. I think Daiwa, yeah, Daiwa was founded 1958. Okay, and Shimano only started fishing because Shimano was actually famous for their bike stuff, right? And Shimano only went into the tackle business at around the 1970s. At around 1980s, they were playing catch up with the likes of Penn and other brands. And basically, closer to the 90s, they've pretty much overtaken with the introduction of, let's say, the Tiagra. Well, actually, it was the Triton TLD, Triton lever drag, kind of changed things. And then with the introduction of the Tiagra, and then Penn kind of slowed down when it came to innovation, and there was a really big reason why the change happened. And mind you, at around the 90s, this is when it happened. Okay, so one of the innovations that really shook the fishing industry was the change of the shape of the spool in the 90s. And Daiwa was the very first one to actually do this. What they did was to elongate the spool and made it shallow. And that was Team Daiwa reel. And they did it for both the bait cast and spinning reel. So they've improved on the bearings, on the bait casters, and from there it kind of just boom. And yeah, Penn kind of got left behind, and I think it was Berkeley that bought them out and became pure fishing. Okay, so the last innovation that I really liked Penn do was right before they were bought out by Pure Fishing, and it was the integrated side plate technology, which they call IST, and that's on the very first international torque. If you do your research and actually go back, the Penn International Torque took out the bridge plate, and all the parts were actually on the side plate. Penn has this technology, they have the patent for it, but they're not using it. But it was really big because it took out the binding that the drag created when you actually tighten the drag. I have one of those reels, and one of these days I'm gonna open it to show you guys. But if you open a star drag reel, there's actually a side plate that holds all the parts together, and they managed to eliminate that. Now this doesn't happen in lever drag reels because of how it's constructed, so there's no bridge plate there. And basically some brands took that technology and ran with it. So yeah, Japan became the hotbed for not just the reels and the rods, but also for techniques. A lot of the techniques that you're seeing now, drop shot, finesse, what is it, Neko rig, Tokyo rig, those are basically Japanese inventions, and they made it to the US. One thing that I find funny is actually Gary Yamamoto, because it's kind of like an American brand made by a Japanese dude. You know, and Gary Yamamoto, that company pushed soft plastics innovation forward. Okay, and yeah, I mean, a lot of the innovation actually happens in the bass fishing scene. So soft plastics was invented because Nick Cream wanted to create a lure that was so lifelike and wanted to copy a night crawler, and that's basically how it happened. Again, soft plastics and all this, they came from the States, but right now, if you look, the best soft plastics actually come from Japan. Like crazy soft plastics come from Japan, and not just for bass. You know, the Japanese counterparts are like crazy. The amount of variation that you see in Japan, like the stuff for Neko rigs, Tokyo rigs, and all that, they're from Japan, and it's crazy. Hooks, hook technology in Japan, all this. If you actually ask what the two best brands of hooks in the world, you'll hear Gamakatsu and Owner, both Japanese companies. And yes, they're in the US, and yes, they have subsidiaries in the US, and they've been in business there for a long time. But guess what? These are Japanese companies. And yeah, there's Eagle Claw as well, and a very good company. But if you actually ask which one's premium, which one's good, which one's the best, and all that, Owner and Gamakatsu, Japanese. So why? All right. So here's the thing. Now, the U.S. is a buyer's market, and this was realized earlier on because of the warranties and all this, right? So companies like Shimano had to adjust, and when they adjusted, what happened was that, like, take for example the Corrado. The Corrado is a scorpion, okay, and in the US, they've been using reels with, like, take for example for braid, okay? They use 50 and 80 sometimes on a reel. So they need a reel that has like a bigger spool. In Japan, the fishing is mostly on the finesse side because of the pressure that they get. So there was a need for a bigger reel with a bigger spool. So Corrado was born. And they took out some parts, let's say bearings, because they're not really essential. And also, when that happens, the cost actually goes down. And remember, the States is the biggest fishing market. And even if, let's say, right now, only 15% of the US goes fishing. But if you look at how big the population of the US is, 15% is a huge chunk. The fishing in the US is supported by the government. Okay? Elsewhere in the world, conservation is an imagination. In the US, it's a reality. So there are stocking programs for fish, and there's limits, size limits, there's seasons for fish in the US, which are not really practiced in a lot of places in the world. So when you have a fishery like that, you can actually get away with equipment that's not really 100%. So as far as fishability is concerned, it kind of takes a backseat. Okay? And, go look at Walmart. You can see that there's $30 rod and reels that are for sale from, let's say, Abu Garcia. You don't find something like that in Japan because their fishing is kind of different. So you'll have combos in Japan that probably would be, cheap, but they're not that cheap. In the US, you find really cheap stuff because a lot of people don't need to spend. And their thinking on fishing is that if they're just using it once a year, they're not going to spend a lot on it. In Japan, fishing is very specific. Take, for example, even if you're fishing for a really small fish, there's cheap rods, and then there's really, really expensive heirloom quality rods, even hooks for these types of fishing. It is literally insane. And people buy. In the US, if you're selling something that's like, let's say, $60 for a reel, that's very, very cheap. And in the US, it's perfectly usable. And guess what? You can catch fish with it. In Japan, yeah, probably something for kids. And yeah, even then, they'll overgrow it, and then done, kind of surplus. So the mentality when it comes to these things is actually kind of different. In the US, warranty is a big thing. There's returns and stuff. And in Japan, it's kind of different. There are warranties, but unlike the US, they don't reward breakages because of negligence or misuse. In the US, you'll have companies that actually invent rods that don't break when you close the door on them. It's, kind of a company that rewards that sort of thing. Yes, I get it. Kind of accidents happen. But remember, you're talking about a really big population and 15% are fishing. So the biggest concern for a US company is to create products that doesn't break even when manhandled. Fishability and all these functions actually come in as secondary or tertiary targets. So the biggest concern is we want to make a lot of profit and we want rods that don't break. So what happens is that you'll find rods that are almost unbreakable and you have to really make an effort to break them, which were something that were available and widely used in the 70s, still available now. You can still buy them, proliferating. Still a lot of people are using them because a lot of people are bouncing the fish, freshwater and saltwater, from a really high areas on the boat. That's the culture. In Japan, they don't do that. So in Japan, they have really technical rods, like take for example, slow jigging rods. They invent that and they can get away with really thin rods, really sensitive rods, really high modulus graphite really high modulus graphite rods, really sensitive, and rods that are very, very specific for use, and they can make this jig dance like it's alive. But the US can't make stuff like that because it's too fragile, because people there, because the market there, the way people, the mentality is very different. If it breaks, people in the States will actually just go to the shop and then have them returned. And the shop has to replace it. So warranties in the States are actually kind of different. This is the reason why JDM products are not supported in the US. Because of how people actually use the equipment there. So the equipment for the US, they're kind of overbuilt. Okay? And most of the time, especially when it comes to fishing, that's very difficult. Fishing that's hard because the fish are finicky, all sorts of other reasons, really pressure. That's that. Now, something like that stifles progress. You don't have that in Japan. You don't have that anywhere else. Now, here's the thing, okay? JDM products are sold in Singapore and Malaysia, and are supported by Shimano and Daiwa. JDM products are sold and supported by Australia, but they don't do it in the US. Why? They say that it's the FCC thing or whatever. And not really, you know. It's because they created products stimulated by how it's being used in the US market. So it can be argued that because Asia, or majority of Asia, has been following Japan and has transitioned to the way they fish, people actually learned that, okay, you can't do this with that. In the States, even if you can say that, hey, you know, you can't do this because that's wrong, because of conservation, because the fishing there is easier than anywhere else on earth. They have just have more fish. It's not their fault. Okay, they just have more fish. So even if it's technically wrong, it still catches fish. So what happens is that, yeah, okay, it works. And then a lot of people see it and they go like, hey, that works. That's why you'll see people in sport fishing boats, these cattle boats, you know, you'll see weird stuff happening. Like, take for example, they're using fast jigs on slow jigging rods and they're still catching fish. Or they're using slow jigs on rods that are not meant for slow jigging, but they're still catching fish. You know, some people just drop the jigs down and then just reel, and they're still catching fish. You do that in any other part of the world, you won't catch fish. But see, here's the thing. It's not their fault. It's really not their fault. It's just how they react to what's in front of them. And I think if conservation ends in the US, that's the only time when they realize how behind they are with the times. So you have techniques that are invented in Japan, you have reels and rods that are invented in Japan, and when they get applied to the States, they're deadly if used correctly. Even if they're not, even if they're using 30% of what this gear is capable of, it's still deadly in the States, because guess what? The pressure, the fishing pressure in the States is not as bad as it is elsewhere. And the reason why rods cannot be supported with the same kind of warranty, and reels, and even the line, you know, it can't be supported, is because they're not using it the way it's meant to be used. And it's as simple as that. Now, the guys over in Australia, they have really big fish in some areas, but they've been following Japanese methods for quite a while. And yeah, they're within the bounds of how, you know, the warranty, the normal warranty that Japan is able to do. It's the same with Asia. But in the States, the market is so big that if you start actually doing the, you know, the warranties and importing parts from Japan, which is out of scope, it's actually going to be out of whack. So what's going to happen is that, well, there's a market for these JDM products, but they're not going to be supported. So people are probably going to get forced, where a small percentage of people are probably going to force to fish the Japanese way. But the fact remains that if you are fishing in either of these areas, you have a choice. If you want rods and reels that are tough as nails, that won't break as easily when you're manhandling things, the US domestic market products is probably a good choice for you. Now, if you're fishing in areas where it's kind of technical to catch fish, then the JDM products would probably suit you better. JDM products are way ahead of their times. They're literally at least 10 years ahead of their US counterparts. The rods that they use to catch tuna with in the States, regular tuna rods, it'll be like almost like a tuna stand-up rod, which is basically a trolling rod. Not really, but something like that. As thick as a tuna rod. Very, very effective, very efficient. The Japanese side, they have popping rods, they have jigging rods that are specific for tuna. And again, they're catching the same fish with smaller gear. So, they're catching marlin with Stella 30,000 reels or lower. These are spinning reels. In the States, you have to catch them with trolling reels or stand-up reels. So these are two very different systems. Which one's effective? They're both effective. Depends on the guy that's actually driving the boat and the guy on the rod. Okay? So again, different systems for different things, and this is how the market changed. One hand, you have discerning Japanese anglers that are very, very specific, that are like surgeons. In the States, you have people in all walks of life catching the same fish because their equipment is actually as tough as nails. You can literally, some people sit on these rods and it's on the transom or the side, the gunnel of the boat, and the rod is flexed like that. It's a normal way of fishing called railing or rail fishing. And guess what? These rods don't break. Up to you which one suits your fishing and really where you're at. Obviously, JDM products, or most JDM products, are still very difficult to buy in the States. So that's another thing for guys there. It's very, very cost prohibitive for them. But if you're into types of fishings or different types of fishing, you'd enjoy the type of rods and reels that are on offer in Japan. Like, take for example, if I was in the States, I'd probably find a way to go popping for stripers, for jack crevalle, and a lot of other fish like tuna there. And I'm sure it'll be fun. I lean towards the Japanese side of things, and if you look around the stuff that I have here, from the rods that are there, the rods that are at the back, the rods that are there, most are JDM. Those two boxes on the side there, and then there's another one behind it, the majority JDM. There are some American stuff that I have that I use for specific stuff, but that's about it. That's me, and it could be different for you. It could be different for you. But yeah, that's it. And like I said, it's the need, your need, not mine, not anyone else's. It's your need that's very important, and what's important to you. Okay, so there's no good or better or what. No, it's only better for you. Okay, the fish don't care. That is it. Okay, now if you have questions, drop them in the comments. If you have reactions or you have anything to add, just drop them down there. Which one do you prefer? Which one do you prefer? That's probably one of these things that we need to be proactive about. Which one do you prefer? Drop them in the comments. Alrighty. If you've learned from this video, give it a thumbs up. Okay, and if you haven't yet, click on the subscribe. If you want to support this channel, click on the membership button. And that is it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Class dismissed.